Hi, this is Aaliyah Swaby, and you're listening to WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from New Haven, Connecticut, and streaming live at www.newhavenindependent.org.
Good morning and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Karen Hartman is about to set the Elm City on fire. She has written a play about race, class, and New Haven firefighters. It's called Good Faith. Yale Repertory Theater starts staging it in previews Thursday night and going on for weeks. Karen joins us today in the WNHH studio to tell us about how she came to write the play, what it taught her about firefighters, New Haven, and some of America's most difficult conversations. Thanks so much for coming in and making time, Karen, this busy time.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the air. I can't wait to hear more about how this all came together.
It's great to be here.
And thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So as I understand it, I haven't read the play.
Right?
This play is inspired by the landmark Supreme Court case on affirmative action involving the New Haven Fire Department, Ritchie versus DeStefano. It's not a courtroom drama. It's not about that case and the specifics, correct?
Well, it's about the case, but it's more about the long-term impact of the case on New Haven, and it is not a recreation of the case or a docudrama.
I mean, you don't have lawyers arguing about the fine points of title, whatever it was.
Unfortunately, there is a little bit of that because if you don't understand the fine points of Title VII and what the disparate impact provision is versus what the disparate treatment provision is, it's hard to actually follow the different arguments that are deeper moral and emotional arguments in the play. So there is a bit of setting that up. There's a kind of composite lawyer character who gives a little mini lecture.
Okay.
And then the characters themselves do talk about it some. But I try to get as little as possible to get the job done, because that's not what people come to the theater to learn about, right?
And also what's so interesting about that case, I covered that case and I was very interested in the fine points.
I know you did.
I was very interested in, I mean, tons of us covered that case, and it was about how our country thinks about affirmative action. How you make opportunities for people of color and professions that have been dominated by whites, and then the backlash in this country to people feeling that some white people's rights were taken advantage, how you balance that, and how you do that within the law. This was a moment when this nation's law changed, that New Haven threw out the results of a promotional exam because no African-American firefighters scored high enough. And under the way the Supreme Court had always defined and interpreted Section 7, that's what you were supposed to do. And a bunch of judges upheld it. But by the time it got to the Supreme Court, which had become more conservative, they said, we think this isn't working the right way, which is sort of what Supreme Court does over time in our country's history, is reevaluate the law in terms of changing circumstances. And they created a new standard.
That's right.
So, and I wasn't going to be asking about the specifics, but that's why. So at the time, that was really interesting. But the reason I'm so interested in your play is because, as you said, this touches something deeper about how our country deals with racial difference and opportunity.
I think what you're saying about opportunity is so right, because part of what was confusing about the case and really a touchstone about the case is this question of fairness, so that no matter how left you are on the political spectrum, this sense of, wow, these folks took a test and then that test got thrown out, and after they studied for it, that's something that resonates. You know, any of us who've taken a test, any of us who work in fields where testing is required, anyone who's gone to college, who's taken the SAT, it's like you can really connect with the idea of what it is to study for something and then have it thrown out. And so to me, that lens of opportunity, who gets the opportunity, what are the rules, why are they changing and who's changing them, becomes a a source of great anxiety, interest, and drama, especially in a have and have not city like New Haven, where, the difference between getting to be a firefighter in New Haven and not getting to be a firefighter in New Haven is enormously high stakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in other cities too. New York.
In
it's
other
a big
cities
deal,
too.
and
Absolutely.
has the same racial tensions.
Yes.
I mean, they tend to be white, conservative, working class firefighters for the most part.
Right.
And then you have political systems in New Haven included, where the government is more liberal, where a growing minority population over the years had demands. And I love the way that class and race intersect here, because you just brought up something I hadn't thought about. So if you think about the sort of more liberal and lefty playwrights, journalists, political actors in New Haven, we came to this with the ideas that we need affirmative action, right?
Yes.
But we also come from a class where we've succeeded partly because of our privilege, and we've done better on tests. Like, we never wanted our kids to have test prep because they knew, coming from a home where they were reading books from 6 months old, they were going to do fine in those tests. We wanted them to be creative. And so we sort of do believe in a meritocracy that we've benefited from. Whereas if we had the life experience of being a working class African American, that cuts differently. They see how they were shut out of opportunities. And the reason we have affirmative action is because there's an unfair disadvantage for them. And of course, the details are so tricky because you're balancing everybody's rights on all sides, and how do you make it work right? Which is why I love that issue.
Well, one of the questions in the play that comes up, I mean, in a humorous way, but is like, well, who is we?
Yeah,
like,
that's
who
what I
even
mean.
is we?
Who we,
So it's
yeah,
like you're saying we, and I mean, we're looking at each other, and, here we are, like,
privileged Jewish
lefties with our headphones on, talking about things. But I don't really know how you grew up. You don't really know how I grew up. Like,
True.
We don't really know who the we is. And I think that part of what some of the very interesting conservative points that get made in this play that I think have a lot of merit and are quite compelling is like, look, here are these ivory tower lefties. They might work for a law firm, for a law class, in a medical field where it's all white people, or all white people and Asian people. And they think that that's meritocratic, right? Nobody, I mean, one of the things that Karen Torrey, the conservative lawyer who there's a character based on her in the play, she told me that she used to, when she was invited to speak at law schools, she would go around at the beginning and she would hand out these envelopes to everybody, these aspiring lawyers, these legal students, and they would open the envelope and it would say, "We're sorry to inform you that we've thrown out the bar exam this year because it's been shown to have a disparate impact on African Americans," which is true. And so nobody's going to become a lawyer this year. We know you studied. And her point is, this would never happen in the professional class. An exam would never get thrown out after the fact in a professional class. It wouldn't happen for the MCAT. It wouldn't happen for the LSAT.
And that doesn't change what should be done. It's just complicated.
It does complicate.
And I love what you say about we, because we are many things. We are many people.
Yeah.
And we define ourselves in different ways. So we are part of a community in New Haven, which is very diverse. And then within that community, we all come from sub-communities that have different needs and different experiences. And I love that about the play, too. As a reporter covering it, I get the sense from reading your interviews here, you had the same experience. I love the way my mind was opened.
Mm-hmm.
I loved getting to know Frank Ritchie Moore and Karen Torrey, who, by the way, had come from a very liberal law firm upstairs because it was challenging the establishment. John Law Williams,
Right.
There's this crossover that then, even though she was more conservative, it had the same feeling of elites and the opportunities for people who aren't elite. And I found it such an easy story to cover fairly. Because even though I came from my own bias, very pro-affirmative action, I found the argument so good on both sides that I was relieved of any worry that I was going to take a side.
Yes.
Because I really found
yes.
everybody's stories compelling. I found the issues great. I was glad I wasn't on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And I thought it mattered a lot.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a great idea of a play. I guess the Yale Law School Dean, Robert Post, said this makes a good play. And Yale School's Journal said, we have the playwright Karen Hartman. And now,
more or less,
starting this week, we have good
and
faith.
I guess they were right.
Good faith. Can we act in good faith? I love that question. And we're talking about that question on Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM.
Yeah.
Your home for community radio at 103.5 FM. Live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. And we're talking with the playwright Karen Hartman, the new play. So, Karen, you picked 4 characters to focus on.
Yeah, and 5 if you include. There's a character called the writer who sort of.
You're in it.
Well, I'm in it to the extent that anyone is in it. Yeah, there's a character based on me.
Were you nice to her, or were you kind of like
It's
making
a little
fun
bit
her?
of both. Yeah, yeah. I'm a little nice to her. I a little bit make fun of her.
That's fun.
Because
So-
I want the play not to be about her. It's really not about her.
But your technique.
It's
I mean, your presence in the play, I take it as a way to help tell the story.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And what happens is you hung out with these folks. Like
Yeah.
Frank Ritchie told me, and he has that famous line, it was in the Times Stories, but said it here, I thought when I go to this play, am I going to be like Brett Kavanaugh coming to
He's
Saturday Night
not
Live?
gonna be
No, he
like
knows
Brett.
that.
He
That's
knows
why he says
that.
it. He knows it. He said, I thought that before I met Karen. He said this on the air, and he said, she spent so much time with me watching how I train, and she spent so much time having a good, honest conversation without pretending she was somebody she's not, which is the best way to do an interview because people could tell if you're a phony. And he said, we really understood each other, and she really heard me out, and it was a good experience, which is the best kind of journalism and playwriting.
Yeah, I felt the same. I mean,
So you had him. You had Mike Briscoe, who's an African-American firefighter who's retired. He then worked at the 911 call center in the city, and he had lawsuits for discrimination against that. He settled pretty profitably against so he also, like Frank Ritchie, even though he's on the other side, felt he was discriminated against, and he collected some money out of that deal. He's featured in it. Who else? Who are the other two?
so the other two are Karen Torrey,
Oh,
the lawyer,
excellent.
and a character based on Tyrone Ewing, who is also an African American firefighter who's now a battalion chief, and who was on the verge of becoming captain when he and I spoke in 2015. And the Tyrone character, and I'm saying the character based on because I did add material, and so I did amplify and clarify and sort of write out. It's not completely documentary, so I don't
Let's
want
talk
anyone.
about that.
Yeah.
So you hung out with each of these people.
I did.
You watched them at work,
I watched them at work. I hung out
and
with
then
them.
you had conversations.
Yes.
Was this a day, a week, 5 times, 10 times?
It was about, gosh, I was living, of course, I ended up living in Seattle. I was living in New York when I got the commission. Then I moved to Seattle with my family for the entire 4 years that I was writing this play.
Wow.
So I was flying back, and Yale Rep generously said, all right, that's fine. We'll fly you from Seattle. So I made
Wow,
probably...
they must have had incredible faith in you.
They must have.
That's a good deal.
What was that? I mean, it's not like it would have been much easier for me if I'd been going on the
On the other hand, I
Metro
bet you got
North.
some good writing done on the plane, maybe.
I got good writing done on the plane, and I wound up being here over these intensive chunks. I don't know how many there were. I'm going to say maybe 8 trips over the 3-4 years. And they were, but like 4 or 5 days each. So it was a lot of time. Not necessarily a ton of time with each of the people featured, but I spoke to many people who didn't wind up in the play.
That's how we do our research.
That's how we do our research, right? So I ended up, after about a year of focusing on the legal issues, I realized, what makes this story magical and imaginative is that it's about firefighters, and firefighters are exciting. And I want to spend time.
And boy, what better character than Frank Ritchie, who's dyslexic and studied twice as hard to do well in this. He's like when he goes after an issue, he learns it, and he's able to speak before the U.S. Senate when they had confirmation hearings. I mean, he really is a compelling character that way.
He is a compelling character, and he's at this point, kind of a public figure. I mean, he's a big social media presence. He makes videos for the, national videos. He was teaching at the academy, so I saw his training.
So you spent how much time with each of these when you finally narrowed it down to 4?
I spent several conversations with each of them. Like Karen Torrey and I spent, one whole day together from like 3 in the afternoon, 2 in the afternoon till like 10 or 11 p.m. But plus like hundreds of emails. And then with Frank and Mike, it was more over time, so several trips over time. I spoke with Tyrone the least, but Tyrone, Mike, and I had this epic 4-hour summit at the Greek Olive where...
That makes you, by the way, an official New Haven Politico.
Yes.
All political business in New Haven takes place at the Greek Olive,
right?
Why do you think that is?
It's just
like, what'd you notice about it? Like, I would never eat. There's nothing there I could eat as a vegan. I mean, what is it about the Greek Olive?
It's so friendly. I mean, and I'd been there before, because I'd been in and out of New Haven for many years and through, but I didn't really understand what it was until I met Gary Tinney there once at like 7 in the morning or 8 in the morning. And at that time, I think he was coming off a shift and everyone else was coming on their shift. So it's like there's people in cop uniforms,
It's true.
firefighter uniforms,
When
the
I do
mayors,
police interviews, sometimes they want to go there too. I don't know, is it because of people with cars, it's easy with long work? Is it because they have really roomy places? Is it because it's that wide menu of American food? Or what do you think it is?
It's all of the above. Yeah, it's super easy to park. So
Yeah.
if you have a car and you're more suburban, and that's the kind of like New Haven suburban.
Right, a lot of
you
cops
know.
and firefighters mostly live in the suburbs.
Yeah, live in the suburbs. They live out of their cars. The service is lovely. Everybody's super friendly. The food is actually better than you would think, given, it's
But it's funny,
above
but New
average diner
Haven is
food.
this foodie city. We have at all kinds of levels of taste, fancy, kind of not fancy. New Haven has this smorgasbord of very local restaurants with character and fantastic food, and all the politicos and firefighters and cops want to go to the Greek Olive.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I wonder why that is.
Maybe you just don't want to deal with the food. Maybe you just want to sit and have the conversation that you're having and, know what you're going to get, order what you're going to order.
You order what you're going to eat for lunch, and then they decide who's going to run for Senate.
Exactly. You don't want to think about the lunch. Like.
So you picked your 4 characters, and then you did a Studs Terkel, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did the Studs Terkel first, and it's funny that you say that because from when I was 12, like, I really wanted to be Studs Terkel.
I started at 16.
Yeah, okay, so.
I wanted to be Studs Terkel.
Yeah,
who
doesn't?
Yeah.
And this sense that, I think I became a playwright because I wanted to be Studs Terkel, and there was, like, only one Studs Terkel. But, so I kind of did the Studs Terkel first, and then narrowed on the 4 characters, and then went back to go deeper into those 4.
That's awesome.
Because those 4... have such vivid voices, personalities, points of view. It's a play. You need it to be thrilling, and you need to fall in love with all the people. And these are 4 people who are moral, who are intelligent, who are interesting, who are flawed the way that we're all flawed.
That's important too, because you wanted to obviously do a respectful and intellectually honest play. You didn't want a play that just advanced Karen's political views. And you picked 2 people on the, quote, other side of where liberals often stand who are such terrific advocates of their position.
Right, and Tyrone as well. So it's actually 3 of them.
Challenging the preconceptions of your audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, because I think this isn't a simple issue. And I want every audience member, whether you're an East Coast liberal, typical theater goer, or hopefully one of a theater goer who is connected to New Haven and not necessarily connected to Yale, who's come to the Rep to see this play because you want to see yourself and your city. I want everyone to feel respected, but I want everyone to feel challenged. I want everyone to have to hear every point of view, and to take that in.
And it's more than 2 points of view, by the way.
It's more than 2 points of view.
This is a very complicated issue.
Oh, yeah. And
it cuts across class and race.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, we're talking about the good faith. Can we act in good faith? The exciting sounding new play at the Yale Rep grew out of the New Haven firefighter case to today. Karen Hartman wrote the play, and she's here today on Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Karen, I wanted to ask you, when you get a little in the weeds here about Studs Terkel, when you so you would do some of these taped interviews, I take it, although it probably wasn't taped anymore, like in his day, probably electronic.
It was
digital.
Electronic, digital, some of them. Some people didn't want to be recorded. Karen Torrey didn't want to be recorded, so I didn't.
That's so interesting.
I just
She's
took
instinct
notes.
that way.
None of the lawyers. No, not just her. The lawyers overall did not want to be recorded, so I took notes. And there's a little, Victor Bolden has a little cameo. He didn't want to be recorded.
He's so careful, that guy. Now he's a federal judge.
Yeah, exactly.
He's an interesting dude himself.
But I type fast, so
But you can't make a character of Victor Bolden in the play because he's so interesting, but he plays it so close to the vest.
Yeah, that's why he's got about 45 seconds.
Yeah, that sounds right. About 45 seconds. He always had the good 45 seconds of any article we ever had with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so you had the text. Would you type out a long verbatim text?
So bless Yale Rep, they sprung for transcriptions on the conversations that wound up being, not all of them, but on the ones that wound up that I knew I was going to use.
And have you done transcriptions before?
I've done interview-based work before. This is the most interview-based, and so I've never hired transcribers before.
Because I find when I do those kind of interviews, when I'm going to have to type out the transcription, it's a pain, and I hate it. It takes a long time, but it also helps me start the editing process. It gives me another chance to grapple with the text and find what it's the essence.
Yeah, definitely. I did come to a point where I retyped it, because at first I was...
But you didn't have to retype everything, right?
I did retype everything, absolutely.
Every minute of the interview?
Not every minute of the interview, but every minute of the play.
Yeah,
so,
I meant when you have this interview, when you have the sprawling interview text, if you have an hour, you end up going to using 3 minutes.
Right, and I know this because I know that a 2-hour play is 100 pages long. So if I interview someone for an hour, that's going to be... I can do the math, that's a long transcript. And so if I had 30, 40 hours more of interviews, it's like this is a lot of typing. But at a certain point, I had to... I did some cutting and pasting at a very early stage of like how these transcripts might fit together. Mm-hmm. But in order to make the play a play, I had to retype it so that I could feel out the rhythm
of their language
for myself, as if I were writing it. Does that make sense?
I do. And also when you said the rhythm, I'm also thinking of, let's say, a poet who writes music, songs, how you have to think of how the words sound when they're spoken out loud. Were you thinking about that? How do you think about that as a playwright when you're working with text, you're working with people's words? How do you think about, or do you consciously think about how they're going to sound when they're spoken out loud in a theater?
Absolutely. And I read everything out loud as I'm writing, and I read it out loud like many, many times.
Now, are other people around? Do you close the door?
I close the door. This is why I can only write in coffee shops for certain parts of the writing, and then I can't write in a coffee shop.
They would have thought you were crazy.
No. Yeah, you can't do that on the plane. So I read things out loud, and what's amazing about working from verbatim is that you get these speech patterns that you never come up with as a writer, but that are really authentic. But then you also get speech patterns that are long-winded or repetitive or actually less clear than invented dialogue. So I was editing throughout for both of those to kind of take advantage of some of that, the jargon, the overlap, the made-up words, the kind of...
What was it like when you were standing up being Karen, being Frank, being Mike? What was that like for you when you started? Did anything change when you said their words out loud? What did it feel like?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I feel like for me, and this sounds a little schizophrenic or something, but that's what it is to be a playwright. You you find a way to embody each of the people.
Right, that is not schizophrenic. You become your characters.
You become your characters, which is why even if the character is not only outside me, but like a real actual person who is not me, who lives and breathes on this earth, at some way it has to pass through me. So I had to feel like I could stand and say every word of this play and mean it. And there's not anything that is a false note from the point of view of the speaker. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think of fiction writers too, and they live with these characters and then they become real people, and that's when the fiction's good.
Yeah, but
doing nonfiction.
What's weird is it's a little presumptuous of me to say this because they already are real people.
Right. But in the play, they're not exactly who they are in real life. They are and they aren't.
That's right. In the play, they're not exactly who they are in real life.
So you use some of their real dialogue, but you didn't do documentary style. You also wrote some of the dialogue for them, but was that after you got a sense of their speech patterns? And
yeah, I mean, I started off wanting to use all verbatim dialogue. But first of all, I didn't have it because, one of the most important characters, Karen Torrey, I hadn't recorded. So I was pretty close. I have very close notes, but
that's a bigger challenge, though.
I was reconstructing. Yeah. It's not, I mean, it is and it isn't because I mean, it is what I do. I'm a playwright. So writing the dialogue is in some ways easier for me. But also because of the necessary backstory for the case, you need as a playwright to build in that exposition to the dialogue of a what I'll call a regular play.
You got to move the story along.
You got to move the story along, but you also have to make sure that the audience knows what happened in the past or whatever. So there's a certain amount of just expository burden that dialogue bears in a play. And if the people never mentioned the things that I needed them to mention, I needed them to say those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases also, I wanted the characters, I mean, maybe they'd made a point, but they hadn't made it very fully or clearly. And it sounded good in the room, but on a stage
Totally.
it would sound sort of partial.
Of course.
So I'm
because there's
filling
understood
in
the lacuna are understood.
exactly.
So you mean that reporters face that? Other kinds of people face it. I mean, we condense certain quotes.
Right.
There's a whole debate where journalists get kind of very defensive and kind of make sure no one's listening when they talk about, have you ever added a word in a quote? Or or when you truncate a quote, because there is that middle part that's just kind of throat clearing that distracts, you put an ellipsis. And how exact are you when you have those quote marks?
Well, and there's a way as a journalist you can leave in, like right now I'm saying, and like. If you put that in print, I look like kind of an idiot.
Unless
right?
we're trying to make a point that it's kind of a feature where a person's relaxed and talking. But you're right.
Exactly.
I will always take out the if it's a tight news story.
Right. So if you're going to run a story about me and I'm a professor or a scholar or a playwright, and you leave in the likes and the or my weird trail off, you're making me look bad in print, even though you're putting
not.
what
That's
I
a
said.
Debate.
Maybe not. But if you're going to do that for me, you have to do it for everybody.
Right.
Because what you could do is you could interview me and leave in the likes, and then interview,
a firefighter.
A firefighter.
I'll give you a story like that. There's a guy who's dead now. He was a budget chief for the city, and I thought he was corrupt, but he was very smart and talented. He's Italian-American, very proud of his heritage. Thought I was a snotty, know-it-all Yale grad, and hated me. And whenever I would catch him doing something wrong, he would go back to, I once quoted him saying, "Gunna."
Mm-hmm.
So I felt "gunna" was not a put down, because it was early in my career, and I felt like I say "gunna." I don't quote myself saying "gunna," but as you say, he saw that as a put down to because he had worked his way up from modest circumstances to being a very smart financial manager with a lot of power. So he said he made me sound like a dumb wop and used it to discredit the reporting. And after a couple of years, he told people that I called him a dumb wop with those words.
Wow, right.
Because of "gunna." So after that, I was really careful about "gunna." When I work with younger reporters, I say, yeah, this person wouldn't mind perhaps, and it is more realistic. But I learned from experience that it could catch you by surprise and then crowd out what you're trying to communicate.
Right. Now, as a playwright, you have a lot more freedom because the actor's going to say "gunna," and then you're not going to really notice
you're
as
seeing
much.
Someone talking.
You're seeing someone talking. But if you're looking at an ain't, or you're looking at a kind of what he should have did was blah, blah, blah. It's like, when do you leave that in? So I left in, I mean, these people were very articulate, so I don't mean to say, oh my gosh.
But it is articulate to say "ain't" sometimes.
It is sometimes. Yeah.
But you're right. It's tricky. How are they going to feel? And you're not writing for them, but you also want to respect them and not distract from the point you want to make.
That's right. But that's part of the fun of it. And that's where we as playwrights have a lot more liberty than you
Especially
as journalists.
when you don't call yourself a documentarian.
As soon as I say this is not documentary, I can really do what I want.
Which, of course, brings up Anna Devere Smith, whose plays I've seen at the Yale Rep. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
Where, am I wrong? Or does she does somewhat similar to your method, also has many characters, whether it's the LA riots or the Crown Heights in New York. Well, she'll interview dozens of people and she'll have many characters and then have the extra step is she's not Karen in her room saying it out loud just for herself. She performs all the roles.
Right.
I'm not telling you something you don't know. I'm just saying for the listeners. So she goes on stage and plays Reverend Al Sharpton and the person who hates Reverend Al Sharpton and Rodney King and the LA cops. And she'll get into each role and feel it. Does she take liberties with the language, or is she so precise?
I don't think she does. I don't quote me on this.
She says documentarian approach, right?
I think it's documentarian. I mean, she condenses and edits, but I think she's more like a Studs Terkel. And Anna Devere Smith was
did Studs Terkel do it as faithfully as was claimed?
Ooh, I don't want to say that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, you, me, and Google can figure that. I don't know.
I mean, it was great, but there's that whole thing that the journalists and documentarians and playwrights, like when we found out that Barack Obama's great memoir combined the characters and didn't quite happen like they said with the girlfriend. I mean, that's that takes away from the credibility.
It does if you, again, I mean, I'm in a sweet spot as a playwright because it doesn't take away from my credibility if I say this is part fiction. If because I can tell you right out what is
Are
and
you
what
telling
isn't.
people this is part fiction?
I am. Yeah. It says that like right at the beginning in the program and in everything that this is inspired by conversations, that it includes what did I say? Something it includes composite and imagined dialogue. And
Is there more of one or the other?
Well, by composite I mean putting characters together.
Right, I get
Verbatim
that.
is what the people said. Imagined is what I just made up. It's a lot verbatim.
Mhm.
And I won't tell you which parts are not verbatim because I want all the four real people to be able to say they didn't say anything that
Okay,
they
that's
want to
fair.
not have said. You know what I mean? But going back to Anna Devere Smith, if I had her skill set of performance and transformative performance, this would have been a transformative performance piece. But I have a different skill set, so it's a play, right? So
And I can't wait to see
that's
it.
the joy of it for me.
The
you
play
know?
is Good Faith. It's inspired by the Ritchie versus DeStefano landmark affirmative action case involving New Haven firefighters at the Supreme Court. It opens at the Yale Rep in previews Thursday night, and we're talking about it on Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM, your home for community radio at 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. So when you came out of this, we talked about having your own mind changed. In what ways were your liberal assumptions challenged? And maybe that's assumption of mine for saying you had a liberal assumptions. And afterwards, what did you think differently from when you started?
That's a great question. Yeah, starting with your assumption. I mean,
Right, unfair assumption.
Well, no, it's fair, but
My kid's elementary school teacher, if you assume, you make an ass out of you and me.
No. It's a fair assumption politically, artistically, and I go at political material often, but I never go at a subject if I am 100% clear what side I'm on from the beginning.
Of course, that's boring.
Right? So I wouldn't have gone into this if I had read up on the case initially and said, oh, this is real obvious, so
I'm with you. I love being a reporter for those gray areas and having my mind changed.
yeah, so this is a gray area, and some of the discoveries that I made it was the class piece, which led me, and this is 2015, so this is,
Before Trump elected.
this is like late vintage Obama years.
It used to be before
right?
Christ and after. Now we have
Yeah.
unfortunately, before Trump and after Trump.
And I have to say, like I was definitely one of those, despite having had these conversations in New Haven, I was definitely one of those liberal bubble people who did not see the Trump win coming at all. But when it happened, I did think immediately about this case and the conversations that I'd had and the way that, the Yale Law School faculty and the liberal African-American firefighters like Mike Briscoe, like Gary Tinney, who was the president of the Firebirds, were on one side of the political divide, whereas the primarily white firefighters were on the other side. And that kind of weird alliance of what people would call the elites and then actual urban African-American people, quote unquote, versus the white working class had played out right in this case, which I found interesting. And I'd had this inside understanding of the moral compass of fairness of a person like Frank or like the other members of the New Haven 20, or like Ben Vargas, who's Latino but who had sued with as part of the New Haven 20, of this sense of like, yeah, these are the rules. This is what I did. This is how I studied. And this is what I expected. And also there was an excitement about firefighting itself. Like this was something that should have been really obvious to me going into it, but I didn't get it until I started actually talking to firefighters that outside the theater, you don't meet that many people who are doing what they wanted to do when they were 6 years old. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
these guys are living the dream. They love their jobs. And there's so much pride, so much excitement, so much kind of giddiness almost and enthusiasm and a real camaraderie. Like they make each other lunch and dinner. They essentially
Chief Alston
live
talked
together.
about that last week on the show. He was saying he's African American. He said,
Yeah.
there's the one place in America where people of all races live with each other. They spend more time in the firehouse together than they often do with their families and cook for each other. And on the other hand, historically, fire departments have been some of the most racially calcified places. So both things are happening at once, which is sort of forcing a group of people, unlike the rest of America, to confront race.
Exactly. So two things in what you said that are super interesting. One is I think that those two things are related. The fact that firefighters essentially live together means that there's been more resistance and it's been slower to integrate firefighting forces than police forces, for example, which are much more diverse than firefighting forces because there is that sense of we're sleeping in beds next to each other. And there are terrible histories of racism going much later and more recent than you would think.
And that-
Designated black beds in a firehouse.
And when Chief
Yeah,
Alston
really
came
ugly.
here, the first
Yeah.
night there were promotions, he was going to the party for the promotions. And it wasn't the party. There was a white party and a black party.
That does not surprise me. Yeah. So it's like anything that's a tight-knit brotherhood can be, and I use that word deliberately, can be segregated by race and gender. And the thing is, I mean, Karen Torrey makes a point, well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg never had an African-American law clerk. So it's like if you look
And
around.
Brett Kavanaugh had a lot of women.
Yeah, so you look around any room that looks like you, where everyone looks like you, and you have to question how everybody got into that room.
And no question
right?
that elite white liberals have to examine
Yeah,
how they live and how they benefit from meritocracy. And
so that I'm trying to come, to that point as well. Oh, and there was another thread of what you just said that I wanted to pick up on, but I lost it unless you can remind me. Okay.
Got a little more time.
All
And
right.
so that's and the other thing that I love, unintended consequences. So like in other words, when you're dealing in real life day to day, a lot of the big fights we have about race or ideology aren't always that relevant. So what I loved about After Richie versus DeStefano, when you're a reporter, you always hear from all the different firefighters ratting on each other, and you're always trying to find out each day who's on whose side. It wasn't long before the black firefighters group and Frank Ritchie were on one side, or the other members of the New Haven 20 who were white in the union, they actually split and had a big fight. And one side was with the black firefighters. And it's always about like privilege, opportunity, who did what, who's going to get ahead, who has some deal going on the side. You cannot keep the day. It's that for this story, except for Ben Vargas, it was white firefighters versus black. But on any other day, you have some black firefighters, some white firefighters against some others on something. And the first mayoral election after Ritchie versus DeStefano, Frank Ritchie and the Firefighters Union endorsed John DeStefano for re-election. And it just never ends that way. It's hilarious. And that's why I love being a local reporter, is that we can look at the big national arguments and ideology do come into play in a local level in a big way. But you can get beyond the ideology, because when you make decisions every day and you're living among people who are different from you, you actually have to get along and figure things out and understand each other. And you can't always predict how it's going to play out.
Sure.
So that makes me wonder sort of what you took from that about, like, do you feel after doing this? I mean, obviously, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, another assumption. Without having seen the play, my hunch is this is a play about how do we talk about race in America.
That is correct.
With special resonance in the era of Trump, when we're told no one could talk about it.
Yes, that's true.
So you did this play, you talked till the cows came home, and you really thought about it. You spent 4 years immersed in this. Are you more optimistic or less optimistic after having written this play about the ability for us to talk about race and class in America?
That's a great question. For me, this is a project, and this is why I wound up being a character in the play, despite my probably better judgment. I couldn't get myself out of it because I felt like
I don't think there's anything
Those
wrong with that
people-
as long as you're hesitant, as long as you're not trying to make it about yourself.
No.
It's important to have the flexibility to do what tells the story best.
But there's not for nothing that these folks spoke with me and with me present in a way that maybe they wouldn't have spoken with each other without me present. So the play is called Four Chats, and 2 of the chats are really between 2 people who aren't me and the writer character. So one is between Tyrone and Mike, which takes up most of Act 1, and one is between Frank and Mike, which is the final scene in the play, right? So after several years of, talking to everybody and
Wait, don't give away the ending.
I'm not giving away the ending, except this is a slight spoiler to say Frank and Mike do talk to each other.
Yeah, that's okay.
All right, I can say that, right?
I'm looking forward to how that plays out.
So for me, the fact of the conversation is something to celebrate, and the witnessing of the conversation, the audience is sort of in the writer's position, right? As she says at the beginning, like, you're going to be the fly on the wall. So the audience becomes witness to a conversation. So if I can, there's a conversation on stage, but there's also a conversation between the stage and the spectator, right? And I believe that in that conversation between the stage and the spectator, there is a lot of hope and a lot of optimism for me in what it is to witness and listen to conversations. Does that make sense?
It is. So I'm trying to figure out, does that make you more optimistic than you were 4 years ago?
It makes me more optimistic if we are willing to show up and listen, right? So
I know you're optimistic that people will show up. So you're saying it can happen if people show up.
It can happen if people show up. That's what I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I always wondered how to do a play. I'm not a playwright. When I wrote a book about the Black Panther trial in New Haven,
right.
One night I had all this great source material, and one night I spent all night. I got the transcript, 3,200 word transcript, page transcript, of the famous trial in New Haven, the Black Panther murder trial, where they wanted the death penalty for Black Panthers and the killing of another Black Panther. And it was such a great drama. I was reading a play, and I was reading, it was all about race and gender. And they had great characters too, like Katie Rohrbach, the lawyer, Bobby Seale, Erica Huggins, especially the jurors and transcripts. So I thought this would make a great play. And then I realized, you said 100 pages, so it's a 3,200 page transcript. You'd have to bring it down to 100 pages, and then how would you be able to do it as documentarian to get the nuances, or could you do this all with just transcript? And I've talked to people, why don't you write a play in this? Well, it's great source material, because there's also great stuff written in the underground press. You get people off to the side reading about what they're saying about the ability of a Black revolution to get a fair trial in America with Brewster and the left-wing press. Then you have the judge who had made comments to an interview that were very racist. He was white, but then he ended up being the one who let them go because he thought they were treated unfairly. And I always admire what you could do working with that material, because I realized I was totally unable to do it. That how would you do 3,200 pages to 100 pages? Would you be able to take source material and tell the whole story the way Anna Deavere Smith does without patching it with some explanatory, succinct material?
Right. Well, and that's like one trial. This is 14 years.
And then I'm describing an article, really, whereas you have to make it a play. Someone has to sit there and watch it and feel that it's going from point A to point B and taking them somewhere and get to know characters.
Yeah.
Which is the extra challenge.
Yeah. And enjoy it. Enjoy it for pure like buy a ticket for it and think, wow, this really took me by the heart. I really got somewhere. That was enjoyable.
Are you going to hang out with people like at the party and opening night and stuff and see what they think?
Yeah.
That must be.
Are you kidding? I hang out in the ladies' room. That's what I do.
Tell me about that.
Hang out at intermission in the ladies' room. That's where you hear what's really going on.
And do you really hang out there?
I kind of do. Now you know.
But what do you do? Do you hide in a stall?
Yeah.
Or do you wash your hands for 20 minutes?
No. I just sort of fly on the wallet. Yeah.
And what's going to happen? What do you hope is going to happen in that ladies' room?
I hope people will be excited that they will have enjoyed their time in Act 1 so much, and they'll say, like, what is this?
Okay.
I've never heard something like this.
This is an assumption, but I believe we're going to enjoy it a lot. And if we lived in New Haven through this, there's really no way we're not going to love this play and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it.
Thanks, Paul. hope
So Karen Hartman, playwright of Good Faith, opening Thursday night at the Yale Rep. Thank you for talking about it with us
so much.
on Dateline New Haven. It was really a pleasure to have the conversation. I urge everyone right now to get a ticket online from the Yale Repertory Theater for Good Faith. If you have any interest in New Haven, if you have any interest in race or class in America, if you have any interest in firefighting, if you have any interest in politics, there's just no way or theater you can't go. And I also want to thank Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.